Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Wing Leader Flight Training with me, Evilot Ganymede, and we are just about to start turn 2 of our training scenario here, birthday present, where we have Japanese bombers against Chinese defenders, and the moment nobody has seen anybody, but hopefully we will get something going this turn. So a lot of the modifiers are similar to what they were last turn, so I'm not going to go over everything in a lot of detail. The setup phase is basically skipped because we don't have any flights or squadrons coming in on board, and then we go straight to the tallying, and our planes are closer together now than they were at the beginning, but it's still a little bit tricky for the Chinese squadrons down here to spot anyone up here and vice versa. But we start off with the Japanese trying to spot things. The Hayabusa squadron here is going to try and spot this, and as before there is a net -1 modifier on their tally roll because the target is behind and below them, but the pilots here are veterans. So they have a net -1 on their roll, and there is a distance of 4 squares between B and P here. So they roll a 2, which means they do not spot them. The D squadron, however, can try, and they are again 4 squares distant from P, and they have a modifier of 0 because they have rear view on their planes and their target is above and behind them, so they're good. So they need to roll a high number. They rolled a 6. So we have a tally on P, which is that, and D is now alerted to them. So then we switch over to the Chinese. The P-40s can try and spot the bombers that are closing in front of them. They have a distance of 3 between them and no other modifier apart from being on a radio call. The Chinese are on GCI, so they get a +1 on their tallying roll. So they also, again, we want a high number. They got a 3 +1 though. That is greater than the distance to the target, just. So they will spot that bomber. And the Chinese down here is actually interesting because the Japanese planes up here are actually in the sun. They're coming from the upper right, and these are actually in the upper right sun arc, and that gives them a -1 penalty on the tally, and they're also through a wispy cloud layer which gives them another -1 to the tally. And the A squadron down here is a veteran, which gives them a +1, and they're on the GCI, which gives them another +1, so it's a net of +2 -2 is 0. So they have no modifier on their roll, but the nearest Japanese target here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares away from them. So they basically can't see them yet because they would have to roll a 7 and they have no modifiers. And of course B here is even further away and isn't even a veteran either. He's green, so this flight would have an even harder time of doing that. So that's all that we're gonna be able to do in terms of tallying this turn, but it's enough to get us something interesting going on here. So next part is the movement, and that happens in a specific order of dogfights, which there aren't any, and then escorts, which there aren't any. Remember, these two are sweeps. And then the bombers move. So the bombers will move forward 2 squares as they do on their bombing mission. Now, because this bomber is being tallied by the P squadron back here, the tallying squadrons move immediately after their targets move. So that breaks the normal turn order. So these guys are actually going to move 1, 2, 3 like that, and then he's being tallied as well. Like this flight's being tallied, by D, who will now try and get up into that square to intercept them. So what would they want to do? Well, they want to get in the way there, because they don't want the P-40E squadron engaging the bombers. I think what they're going to want to do is to flip around. Now, ordinarily, if you just do a complete 180 flip, that's 1 movement point. Anything up to that is no movement point cost. So what they're going to do is, I'm actually going to just do that with the counter, but really what they've done is they've rotated like 135 degrees, not 180 degrees. So they're going to point up like that, and then they're going to charge up here and intercept them. So remember, they have a climb rating of, actually they're from altitude 10. They essentially use all their movement to climb that 1 square, because they're right at the top of their altitude range. So they are going to spend all 3 of their movement points, now that they're alerted, to climb up there. Yeah, they are actually marked as alerted. They also get a climb marker as well. So it's not ideal for them, because they've got in the way of the P-40Es behind them, but they're not exactly at their optimum performance, because they've had to essentially just suddenly turn around and climb up, and they're at a disadvantage now because they're climbing. So yeah, this is it's not going to work out great for Flight D here, but you know, they have to get themselves in the way, because otherwise that P squadron is going to catch up with the bombers and wreak havoc among them. That's the chain of tallies done. So this moved, the Y bomber moved first, then the P flight moved, and then the D flight intercepted them, and that's that done. And then these guys will continue to move, and they'll just carry on what they did before. So they're gonna essentially angle up and move forward 1, and angle up and move forward 1, and that is 3 movement points still, is it? Yes, so they're at 4 to 9, so that's still a climb of 2. They're going to struggle getting even higher though, so that could be interesting. And that is it for the movement. But now we have 2 flights in the same square here. There's going to be a combat going on. So let's see what happens there. So we're now in the combat phase. The first thing we do when we have a look at our combat summary is determine who the attacker is. The attacker is the side with the tally, and the side without the tally is the defender. Now, D has the tally on P, so D is the attacker. Now, this could also be a bounce. So let's have a look at that. Now, bounce and evasion are in the advanced rules, but I think quite a few other people who play this game kind of just merge them in with the basic rules, because they really should be part of the basic rules. So a bounce is a surprise attack on a single defending squadron, and it applies if there's a fighter attacking another squadron out of the sun, which is not happening in this case, or if the defender is a fighter squadron which is either unalerted or has a tally on a squadron outside its current square, and they do. So the P-40Es have a tally on the bomber squadron that is 2 squares in front of them. That means they are actually bounced. So they're caught by surprise by this. Essentially, they're focused on the bombers in front of them, and they don't see these guys zooming up from below until it's too late. So D is the attacker, and P are the defenders. And then the attacker has to figure out what rating they want to use in the combat. So this is where the speed and the turn come in. So when you're the attacker, you can choose what the combat is going to be, theoretically anyway. And, you know, a speed combat is going to be a hit and run attack. The speed of the planes is the important thing. A turn combat is going to be one where the maneuverability of the planes is more important, so they're like wheeling around each other and so on. But in this case, what's happened is that the attacker has entered the defender's square from one of the 3 squares that are in front of the defender, so either the one in front and above, or in front and below. And that makes it a head-on attack. And a head-on attack must always be resolved as a hit-and-run attack. So that means they have to use their speed. They can't use their turn rating. So actually, this has proven to be a bit more of a disadvantage here, because at this altitude, the Hayabusas have a speed of 3, which is not very good. They would have much preferred to use their turn of 5 here. But on top of that, the Hayabusas climbed into this square, which is going to reduce their speed by 1. So they have a speed of 2 at this point. So they're at quite the disadvantage. So it was possibly ill-advised for them to jump in on that flight. But what else were they to do, really, I guess? You know, they don't know that anyone else is coming up from below, and they just see an immediate threat, so they're going to go and intercept it. So that means that we have to figure out the differential between the attacker and the defender. So we're actually going to skip up to the combat table up here, and we are going to figure out what's going on. So the Japanese we've established a base speed of 3, -1 because they are climbing. So they have a base speed of 2. And then on top of that, they are a flight. So that's another -1. So they've actually got a speed of 1. Wow, that's terrible. So they have a grand total of a speed of 1. And the Warhawks, who are the P-40Es, altitude 11, they have a speed of 5. Good grief. They're going to tear them to bits here. They're not diving or climbing, so they're still a 5. And they are not veteran, green. They are a flight though, so they are at -1 on that. So they're a 4. And that's it. So we've got the Chinese at 4 and the Japanese at 1. So the defender is actually on a 3 and the attacker is on the -3, because that's what the difference between that is. So the attacker's got quite a disadvantage here, and the defenders are quite well off. On top of that, there is evasion, which is the other advanced rule that should be in the basic rule. And that says that if every defender has a basic speed value equal to or greater than that of the attacking primary combatant, before combat is rolled, the defender can declare evasion even in the turning fight. Now, ordinarily they could, but to evade, they must not be bounced. So they have been bounced. The defenders cannot evade. So that's all that we're going to have here. But ordinarily, their speed would be way higher. They would be able to evade here, but they've been caught off guard. Next step is to roll. So usually I just do the attacker first. So we just look on this column and see what happens. So we have a head-on combat. So that's a -2 on the roll. You see that both of them actually get that -2 penalty. But the attacker has bounced the defender, so that's +1. So it's a net -1 on the attack roll. And we roll on 2 dice. And we rolled a 7. So a 7 -1 is a 6. That is no hits from the attacker. And then the defender, on the other hand, has a -2 on their roll. The attacker did bounce them, so that's a -1 on them, so that's -3. And that's it. There's no defense rating going on here. So they've got a -3 on their roll. So they've got a really good hits column here, but because they've got a -3 penalty, it's making them almost as bad as the attackers. So let's see what they roll. They roll a 9. So 9 -3 is a 6, so they get 1 hit, which is what we use the dice for here. So we roll for the losses, which are up here. So the protection rating of the Hayabusas is 3. And we do not have any of these modifiers in play. There's no target protection H going on here, that's only for certain bombers. But we do add the primary combatant's firepower, and the firepower of these Warhawks is quite impressive. It's a 2. So we're going to add 2 to the roll and see what happens. And we roll a 6, which is emphatically a loss. So one of the Hayabusas gets shot down, basically. So we put that on here for D. And the next thing to do is to roll for cohesion. I'll put that as an inset here so we can roll the dice. Now we've got to see whether the squadrons actually, or the flights actually hold themselves together. We're actually looking at the flight column, which is on the right there. And it's actually quite likely that we're going to see things break. But let's have a look. So for the attackers, they've actually taken 1 loss. So that's going to be a -1 penalty already. And then they're not veteran or green. They are on the attacking side though, so they get a +1, so that negates the penalty there. They don't have a radio though. The Japanese do not have radios, so that's a -1, and that's it. So they're going to get a -1 on their roll. And they rolled a 5, and that is enough to shatter them. So they are broken. And the thing with flights is because they're smaller, they're more fragile. And they will break a lot more easily. So a squadron with that roll would have actually been disrupted, and they would have lived to fight another turn. But being broken now, these guys are going to be going home. They are done. They actually get a return to base marker on them as well, which replaces their current mission. So they're finished. They have no fight left in them. Now, the same role, of course, applies to the P-40Es, though. Let's see, they've got no losses, no veteran, no green, no attacker, no Loughbury. They do have a radio. They have no penalty, so they're just going to roll a straight 2d6. And they roll a 6, so they're awful as well. There's nothing doing there. They've rolled a 6. They've broken 2. That's awesome. So this is part of the fun of this, is that, you know, you think you're going to get a drawn out fight, and actually they just land up smashing each other. So that's it for that. But on the plus side, from the Japanese perspective, I mean, that squadron, even though that was a bit of a desperate that flight, has actually managed to deflect the incoming attack from the bombers here, who are just going to carry on. So, you know, that worked out in favour of the Japanese, really. Ordinarily, after the cohesion roll, you would then get a low ammo marker on the participants of the combat, who are fighters. So D and P would have got a -1 low ammo marker. But since they're both broken, they're actually both going to turn tail and go home. So what this means is they're going to essentially fly off in their respective directions in the next turn, but they're not going to be participating in the game anymore. So this is part of the thing you've got to get your head around that I was talking about in the key concepts video, is that the fights can be very brief like this. They're literally just one pass and they're both gone. They can drag on a little bit further, but the squadrons are going to be disrupted over time. They're definitely going to be losing ammo over time, and if you look at the cohesion table, the modifiers for that, the ammo penalty gets worse. So after the first round of being in the combat, they've got low ammo. They'll get a -1 on their cohesion roll. After the second round and beyond that, they'll get a -2 penalty because they'll have depleted ammo. So it's harder and harder for them to stay in the fight, and you know, eventually they'll get disrupted, if not completely broken, and then they'll have to go home. So it's really about trying to, you know, do things that will make you last as long as you can, the dice notwithstanding. So that's it for the combat. Theoretically, in the administration phase after this, the squadrons will roll to escape, Usually the way I do it when I'm soloing is that I don't bother with that until the next turn. So I give them a chance to go their separate ways, and then if I'm fine with it, I just say they can go. Because you can do that. If both players agree, or in this case, if I agree with myself, I can just say, yeah, those planes have flown off, they're not relevant anymore, we're not going to track them on the board. I just don't like doing it straight away here because they're still entangled here. And I just realised I forgot to move this guy, didn't I? So he should have moved forward too as well. I should have done that movement before doing all the combat, but I was a little eager to do that. So didn't affect anything else, but he would have moved forward as an unalerted fighter, and that would have been that. So that's it for turn 2.